Back on Sports Overtime on the Fox 59 Red Couch with Speed Sports' Bruce Martin to help break down what we saw on Fast Friday. And Bruce, what I saw was Chip Ganassi Racing running circles around quite a few of the other teams. They looked darn good today.
They looked very good, and that's the one thing that I would say going into Saturday is the one constant to really look for. Not only was Scott Dixon the fastest, but that allowed him to draw first for the qualifying order, and he drew number one,
perfect draw,
which should be the best time of the day weather-wise to go out and safely get into the field. Remember, all they need to do tomorrow is make the Fast 9. And the other guys at the rear of the field need to make positions 10 to 30. Anybody outside of those positions, you know, I feel bad for. There's going to be some quality teams that are going to be fighting it out for the last row, which is going to be a fairly big part of this weekend also. But I think right now, the way Chip Ganassi Racing is looking, all four of those cars could be in the Fast 9.
You look past Chip Ganassi, and it's not just them in the Honda, with Honda engines that have been good, especially when Fast Friday came today and the boost got turned up. Honda seemed to have a little something extra on Chev. We saw Pato Award, Rinus, VeeKay up there in speed, but it was certainly more Hondas than bow ties up there.
Well, Pato Award, I believe, was sixth at the end of the day, and he was really surrounded by Hondas. And he even admitted after the day was over, he could probably use a little bit of company up there from the Chevrolet guys. But, you know, there's some good Chevy guys out there. Rinus, VeeKay, any of the Ed Carpenter racing cars, I think, could do pretty well tomorrow. It's all going to depend on the track conditions. It's going to be hot. It's going to be humid. It's going to be slick, but we saw in hot, humid conditions today some 231s,
yep,
some fast speeds. It ought to be pretty entertaining, but the one thing that jumps out at me about this year's pole day and qualifications at Indianapolis, usually a lot of times you'll have a clear-cut favorite going into the qualifying weekend, but the field is so tight. Other than the Ganassis, I don't see a clear-cut favorite for really anything.
One of the cars that impressed me the most, at least this week so far, was Conor Daly in the 47. He was seemingly up there in the top 2 or 3 speeds every day. Wasn't certainly up there today, but he seems like a car that even if he doesn't qualify at the top, could maybe even work his way through the field come race day.
Another Ed Carpenter racing car, and that car's looked very good. I think Ed Carpenter's got 3 really good cars ready for the race. Another one to look at, even though they may not have been up toward the top of the speed charts, I think the Rahal guys, all 3 of them, have very good race cars. Most of this past week was spent working on race conditions, and I think in those conditions they are in pretty good shape. And you know, it's just all going to be a matter of, the interesting thing about this is because with the current formula, it's a little bit harder to pass. Some drivers are hopeful it'll be a little bit easier to pass this year, but if it's like the race has been the last couple of years, how your shot at Indy 500 victory could be determined so much by where you qualify. We've seen years in the past where drivers have started 19th or even 24th and have gone on to win the race. The year Juan Pablo Montoya won his second Indy 500, he had dropped all the way back to 33rd.
Dead last.
After an early crash. He came back, was fighting it out with Will Power at the end. But when you think that so much is going to ride on where you start this year because of how difficult it's been to pass over the years, that's really going to add another level of importance to qualifications.
You brought up the Rahal Letterman group, so that brings my attention to, obviously, alongside the 2 main guys, is Santino Ferrucci has been just as good, really, until that crash, we'll say that. But he came back today, and his car is still in top 5, so props to the Rahal crew for putting that car back together and still giving Santino a chance, it seems like, this weekend.
Well, not only did they put the car back together, and some of the guys were there till 5 in the morning working on that car, but Santino showed he's drives with no fear.
Yeah.
You know, we saw him get out of the car yesterday, hobble into the safety vehicle, and here he is. He gets back into the cockpit and goes for it. So that's a kid that could do very well. His other 2 Indy 500s here, he's finished quite well. So that's definitely a kid that's not afraid to go for it.
Do you have a favorite this weekend? I know you say it's open, but in like 10 seconds, give me a favorite.
Favorite for the pole, I'm
Yeah.
going to stick with Scott Dixon, but I could also see maybe a guy like Tony Kanaan shock the world and maybe get in there. He's got probably the best car he's had here in a very long time.
It's always hard to bet against the Iceman. That is Bruce Martin of Speed Sport. We will be right back on Fox 59 Sports Overtime.